Hello and welcome along to the JCT Mechatronics modules. This is module 12 using the wireless function on the microbit. This is activity C. This is using the pitch of the microbit to create a shifting gearbox. Now this is a follow-on activity from activities in earlier modules and the other activities in module 12 itself. This is a complicated piece of code. If you haven't done activity A and B in module 12, I would strongly advise you have a look at those before starting into this exercise. So to begin, what we want to have happen, let's look at our planning on our visualizer here. I have my microbit hooked into my all-in-one robotics board. This is going to be the receiver. It's going to receive an instruction from my controlling microbit, my transmitter. The all-in-one robotics board is going to control the motor based on what instructions my transmitter sends to the receiver. So the planning stage is critically important in getting this right. You don't want to be in make code trying to figure out how come nothing's working because it wasn't planned right originally. If we take our microbit, what we want to have happen here is when we take our microbit, we want it to be sitting level with the motor off. As we push forward, we want it to engage first gear when it crosses a certain point. So let's say that on our plan here, if we go below -10, so on our microbit here, this area, we want that to be 0. We want it to be off, down as far as -10 degrees pitch. As I tilt the microbit below that, I want it to engage first gear on the motor. So I want it to be a soft start for my motor. So if I take the next section and I say 20 degrees there, this area, I want that to be first gear. So down as far as -10, 20, 30. So the area in between -10 degrees pitch and -30 degrees pitch. So as you hold the microbit and tilt it forward, you're now in first gear, and as you tilt forward more, you're now going to go into second gear. So we'll take the same division. So -50 degrees pitch puts you into second gear, and below that is going to be third gear. So this area here is off, this area is first gear, this area is second and third gear. So on our receiver, let's say third gear is going to be 100% power going to the motor. Let's say second gear is 50%, and let's say that first gear is 25%. So I've picked 25% power for first gear, 50% power for second gear, and 100% for third gear. Now, those percentages could be whatever ratio of power you wanted to put in. You may prefer, if you're making this in a project yourself, to say 33%, 66%, and 100%. But for our activity, we're just seeing the difference in power outputs we can achieve using our microbit controller. So, what will that look like in terms of coding? Well, from our previous activities, we know that off, we can send the number 0. First gear will send the number 1. Second gear, we'll send the number 2, and for third gear, we'll send the number 3. So there we have the 4 numbers we're going to send and what they should do on our motor. So let's jump across into make code and try and translate our plan into code that will help our device function. So over here in make code, I'm going to open up a new project. I'm going to call this module 12 activity C, and this is the transmitter. Okay, so as I have done in the previous 2 examples, activity A and B, I'm going to start off with good practice and set my radio group straight away. So my radio group is radio group number 1. Now, what I want to do is in the forever block, I'm going to use the conditionals again. So in the logic area here, I'm going to start off with the if conditional, if something, as I've done in the previous examples. So I'm going to say that if, and I'll take the comparison, if the pitch, which I find here in the input and in the more section, if the pitch is greater than, and from my plan there on the visualizer, if it's greater than -10, so if it's anywhere up to 0 or above that, so if it's greater than -10 degrees, then I want it to radio send number 0. And again, for feedback from myself, I'm going to say show number 0. Now the next little bit of code, if I look at my visualizer, I have set up in make code that when the pitch of the microbit is above -10 degrees, it sends number 0, which we're going to make turn off our motor. When we go below -10, there's a tricky little bit of code. Because all the values here are below -10, we cannot simply say if less than -10, gear 1, because that covers a full range here, and then when we go into second and third gear, we have conflicting code. So we need to say specifically, if the pitch is less than -10, but greater than -30, it should be in first gear. So what that looks like in make code, if we jump back across, in the logic drawer, if I scroll up slightly, there's a set of instructions called Boolean. And if I take the top one there and drag it out, now I can say else if something or something. So what that looks like is, if I duplicate this and I say if the rotation is, and I can say less than -10, and duplicate this again and drop it over here. I'll zoom back in here slightly so we can see this. If the rotation is less than -10 and greater than -30, so I've set the upper and the lower limit. If it's less than -10 but greater than -30, well then what I want the microbit to do is I want it to send radio number 1, which is going to be first gear. And again, for a little bit of feedback for myself, I'm going to say show number 1. So the person, be it me or whoever else who is holding the controller in their hand, can see that they are now in first gear. Now, likewise, if we jump back to our visualizer, for second gear, we want to be less than -30, but greater than -50. So we want to fall in this area. So to do that and make that work in make code, if we jump back across to make code, by clicking here again, now this time I can copy all of this guy by right clicking in the middle, anywhere around the end, and saying duplicate. And if I drop this in here, well then I can say if the pitch is less than minus 30 and greater than minus 50, well then our microbit, we want to send number 2. And finally, if I jump back to my visualizer, if the pitch is less than minus 50, that should be gear number 3. So back in make code again, I can say that I'm just adding another block of code here, and I'll copy the top one. I don't need the in-between, I just need the lower value now. If the rotation pitch is less than minus 50, then show number 3 and send radio number 3. So I don't need this last little bit of space down here. I will delete that by clicking the minus. And let's talk through exactly what we have done, because this is a complicated piece of code. We really need to understand what's happening on our plan to follow what's happening here. So if we look to our visualizer, this section here, gear 0, where the motor is off, is covered back in make code in the first block. If the rotation is greater than minus 10, send number 0 and show number 0. The next section for gear 1 is between minus 10 and minus 30. So back in make code, if the rotation is less than minus 10 and greater than minus 30, send radio number 1 and show number 1. Likewise for second gear, if the rotation is less than minus 30 and greater than minus 50, send radio number 2 and show number 2. And finally, if the rotation, the pitch, is less than minus 50, send number 3 and show number 3. So I'm going to save that, and I'll just flash that across now to my microbit. I should see, I'll just plug out my computer so I can move my microbit freely. I should see that as I tilt back up in positive, I stay on 0. As I tilt below minus 10, I should be in gear 1. As I tilt further, I go to gear 2. As I tilt further, I go to gear 3. So there I am in gear 3, gear 2, gear 1, and finally gear 0. So my transmitter seems to be working okay, going by my plan. And now I need to tell the receiver what it is that should happen for the motor when this transmits. So I'm just going to hook in my receiver here. I'll leave it sitting on my plan. And let's look at making the code for the receiver over in make code. So let's jump over into make code now. And I'm just going to start off a new project. I'm going to call this module 12 activity C, and this is the receiver. So if I come along and start off by adding in my Keytronics extension because I want to control a motor. There's my robotics board. Now, good practice, set the radio group at the start. So after I've set the radio group, I am now going to move over, I'll just pull the forever block out of the way, I am now going to go to the radio drawer and I'm going to take out on radio received number. I'm now going to use some conditionals. By opening the logic drawer, I can add in the if block. So if something is true, then what should happen? And again, using the comparison block from the logic drawer, if I can drag the received number part and drop it in here. If received number equals 0, then turn off all outputs from the robotic board. By clicking twice on the plus, I can say if, and again I'll just duplicate this, if received number is equal to 1. Well, then what I want to have happen is, by clicking on the motor section of the robotics drawer, I can say motor 1 forward at speed, let's say 25%. If we click again, by duplicating that little block of code, I can say if the received number is 2, well then going by my plan, that should put my motor at 50%. And finally, if I add in one more, else if, and I'll duplicate this, if the received number is 3, then, and I'll duplicate this little block of code, motor forward at speed 100. So there's our 4 gears within our gearbox. Neutral, where everything is off. 1 at speed 25%. 2 at speed 50%. And 3 at speed 100%. I don't need this last little block of code here. So I'll just get rid of that. So I'm just going to flash that little block of code across to my microbit. If I look at my visualizer, I should see that the motor is off and that my remote control, my transmitter, is reading 0. So it's above minus 10 degrees. As I tilt forward, when I go into gear 1, I should see that my motor is now turning slowly at 25%. As I tilt further forward, and I go into gear 2, my motor is now turning at 50%, and as I tilt forward further, I'm now in gear 3 in this area here. And as I tilt back up, so lifting the nose of my microbit forward, gear 2, you should be able to hear my motor slowing down, gear 1, and gear 0. So, following my process, I've planned out what I wanted to have happen, and that's probably the most important stage of the entire programming process. Planning out exactly what you want to happen, coding that over in make code, bringing it back and testing it, and now that I've tested it and it works, I can now apply that to a vehicle if I wanted to on a project. So that has been our pitch shifting gearbox. That has been a follow-on from the other activities within Module 12, the wireless module. I hope you found that beneficial. I hope that will be of use to you and your students in the coming years ahead. And again, I hope you will join us in the next module, in Module 13, where we investigate pulse width modulation. Thank you very much for watching.